Have you ever wondered if that sleepy coin sitting in your wallet could suddenly pay for a beach house? Well, buckle up because today's sleepier pick just rang the morning alarm. Now, I was leaning on my kitchen counter, stirring instant coffee because, well, thanks to crypto, I kind of spend my real coffee budget on gas fees. Now, that's when the notification kind of flashes. Top Bitcoin analyst says that XRP to $10 by the end of 2025. That was $10, and on paper that sounds like pocket change, but when you remember that XRP is still kind of lounging around $2 and a bit, well, that projection is the kind of financial equivalent of watching your couch potato cousin qualify for the Olympics. Now, I kind of spit out my half coffee, and mostly kind of because it kind of tastes like, well, drywall, and kind of pace around trying to decide if I just read the hype or if history is actually in the making. So let's unpack what George actually said then, why it actually matters, and whether this prediction is just hopium or a real chance to upgrade from instant coffee to that kind of artisan kind of stuff with FOMA that you kind of pretend to understand. And hey, here's a quick side note before we dive deep. If you're like kind of chewing on crypto news with actual human beings instead of reading these endless doom scroll threads, hit that link in the description and jump into our free crypto Discord server. We argue, we meme, we occasionally agree on something. It's great. All right then, so coffee kind of refilled and mood kind of stabilized a little bit. Let's get into this. George jumps on Altcoin Daily with Aaron Arnold, that is, and who's kind of practically the YouTube bartender of crypto gossip at this point. Now, he pours strong takes and everybody kind of keeps coming back for just one more. Now, George drops the line $8 to $10 XRP is, quote, conservative. So conservative, that's kind of like calling a Tesla Roadster a neat little runaround, right? Now, the room kind of goes silent for just a beat, except for the collective sound of traders slapping the buy button. Now, in case you're brand new to the party, here's the kind of elevator pitch on XRP then, right? It's the token at the heart of Ripple's network, a payment system designed to move money across borders faster than you can say wire transfer fees. Now, XRP has survived more plot twists than a soap opera. You've got lawsuits, market crashes, meme coin turmoil, you name it. And unlike that one altcoin that you bought in 2021 that vanished faster than my New Year's gym motivation, XRP is still here, still kicking, still on pretty much every major exchange, and hasn't been abducted by aliens. Now, George's logic, it kind of pivots on two pillars here: institutional interest and track record. So let's kind of tackle the first one then, institutions. Right, picture the crypto market as a giant beach, right? Retail investors like you and me are kids building sandcastles. Institutions, they're the adults who kind of show up with institutional grade bulldozers. They carve out a private lagoon and suddenly there's a 5-star resort where your sandcastle used to be. Now, when they arrive, the landscape changes fast. Now, George points to multiple filings for XRP exchange-traded funds quietly piling up like airline miles on a corporate Amex. Now, if the regulators stamp approved, and boom, right? Every pension fund, hedge fund, and sleepy family office gets a green light to scoop XRP without setting up self-custody wallets or worrying about grandma's seed phrase. And so that brings us to pillar number 2, right? Which is track record. Now, Aaron from Altcoin Daily reminds us that the XRP token has weathered several cycles. The translation here is that when Bitcoin sneezes and drags markets into the kind of existential kind of crises, XRP kind of pops a vitamin C tablet and just keeps on jogging. Now, sure, it doesn't always kind of sprint upwards, but it doesn't flatline either. Now, for new traders dipping their toes in, a coin with kind of scars and stories, it feels safer than a brand new meme coin promising 1000x, but evaporating faster than pizza at a hackathon. And so, speaking of that 1000x fantasy then, right, Aaron kind of pokes George's, or at least pokes George, with the old, or at least age-old kind of retail question. bro, can I flip $1,000 into 100 grand by New Year's? And George, of course, chuckles here because seasoned traders politely way of saying, buddy, sit back down. And he kind of warns against chasing extreme returns without grasping the risks. I mean, yeah, sure, Pepe Coin did cosmic moonwalks, but odds of striking that particular lottery twice, and that's about as likely as me running into my ex without spilling coffee all over myself. Now, George, of course, suggests newbie plants, newbies plant most of their funds in fundamentally strong projects. And then maybe, reserve a degen sandbox 5 to 10% for coins with dog logos wearing astronaut helmets. Okay, so let's just pause here for a stat check then, right? XRP today hovers around $2 and some change. If it waltzes its way to $10, that's roughly 4.3x move. That feels pretty juicy, but pretty sane at the same time. Unlike predictions that involve so many zeros that your calculator taps out. Now, for context here, George also sees Bitcoin itself climbing 1.5 to 2x, potentially landing somewhere between 200k and 300k by the time this cycle ends. Ethereum a pretty comfy 3 to 4x, and those numbers may not break the sound barrier, but on a multi-trillion-dollar asset, they're Everest size. So relative to that, a 4x on XRP seems pretty downright reasonable. Okay, so there is a plot twist, and do you remember, Da Vinci Jeremy? That's the guy who once dunked on XRP so hard that it left a dent in crypto Twitter. Now, he's famous for predicting early Bitcoin riches and telling everyone XRP was heading to zero. Well, Da Vinci just pulled a movie-level redemption arc. Now, not only did he admit institutional demand has him rethinking, he tossed up his own top target, $24. Yeah. So the guy who used to call it a worthless token is now eyeballing a new all-time high, triple George's conservative take almost, right? That's somewhere on Reddit, a thread is titled XRP will never break $1 is quietly sobbing. Okay, so let me slip in something important before we continue, right? If you're hunting for a place, to trade, check out the link to Blowfin in the description down below. It's the up-and-coming crypto exchange that's been smoother than my morning pour-overs, that's tight spreads, faster withdrawals, actually helpful support. So why don't you get in, set up an account, and start exploring your next move. Plus, signing up through our link in the description helps the channel and keeps these caffeine-fueled rants completely free. Okay, so back to George. Now, he's calling $8 to $10 conservative. So what would push it beyond that then, right? There's actually two scenarios here, right? At least two scenarios that do bubble up. The first one, a full-blown altcoin season where liquidity floods everything with a ticker symbol and a dream. The second one is that a Ripple legal victory encore or major partnership, imagine a top 5 global bank rolling out XRP for cross-border settlements. Now, if that, of course, domino does fall, the FOMO tsunami could actually make last cycle's Dogecoin mania look like a kiddie pool splash. Okay, so let me tell you a very quick story here. Last cycle, a friend of mine, let's call him Dave because, well, his name is Dave, and he swore that Solana would never break $50. He sold at $49.50, claiming victory. 3 months later, it printed $250, right? And he developed a mysterious eye twitch every time someone said so. The moral of the story here, markets have a naughty habit of outgrowing our imaginations. So when reputable analysts label something conservative, sometimes they're secretly leaving space for the surprise fireworks. But let's keep our feet on the ground, right? Price isn't magic. It's demand meeting supply. So XRP's circulating supply is pretty hefty, right? It's north of 50 billion tokens. So for $10 to really truly stick, we're going to be talking about $500 billion market cap, give or take. That's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination because, well, market cap is quite misleading. It's just macro level pricing at the end of the day. Now, Bitcoin's been there, right? But it necessarily it's kind of mainstream acceptance at this point, right? Now, ETF flows, corporate treasuries, maybe even central bank experiments. And then there's the kind of question of selling pressure, right? Early investors sitting on mountains of XRP, they might in fact cash out. So will demand outweigh the kind of stampede? And well, that's the trillion-dollar guessing game here. So the conversation kind of shifts then from, talking about price appreciation, conservative targets to risk management. Now, George kind of breaks it down. Emotions kill portfolios faster than hacks do. So if you set unrealistic moon targets, wake up at 3 a.m., squeezing your phone, panic selling during a routine dip, then buy back higher, rinse and repeat, and now you're kind of dizzy and broke. Well, he suggests a boring, steady game plan instead, right? Determine your exit targets in advance. Stick to them, and actually write them down and actually stick them on a sticky note, right? And maybe even tape that sticky note to your monitor next to a kind of reminder to drink more water. It's not sexy, but I tell you what, it is profitable. And Aaron himself, he digs into the timelines here, right? A lot of viewers here, end of 2025 and think it's forever away. But here's my take, right? Time flies faster in crypto than on TikTok. Blink twice and, that kind of halving is done, and blink again and there's a new layer 2 narrative, and again, and you got the meme coins kind of spelled, with kind of fever kind of vowels. And then, there's a new model number, right? And if you kind of start dollar cost averaging now, you won't actually feel the kind of daily roller coaster. Your just average entries kind of just hum along, and suddenly you're sitting pretty when the market finally does indeed wake up. So let's bring Ethereum into the mix. Now, George says the ETH could triple or quadruple, presumably on the back of EIP-1559 kind of burn mechanics, layer 2 expansions, and maybe there's an institutional narrative of green kind of staking yields. Now, that matters because altcoins historically outperform when Ethereum is flexing. So let's picture a big kind of brother breaking the kind of, peninsula, and little siblings, XRP kind of included, swoop in to grab the candy. Now, if, of course, ETH runs, liquidity ripples, pun very much intended, outwards. And here's another juicy little tidbit, right? George hints at Bitcoin's dominance retracing once BTC peaks. Now, historically, after Bitcoin tops, money kind of sloshes into mid caps, then small caps, and all season in kind of full kind of technicolor, if you will. Now, if that 200 to 300K Bitcoin peak really does happen, well, that's kind of bragging rights alone could actually drag mainstream eyeballs into the top 10 altcoins. Just look at 2017, look at 2021, and it's like kind of seasonal kind of allergies come around like clockwork, just kind of hurts a little different each time. Okay, so let's do some sanity checks on the math. Suppose Bitcoin tags 250K and dominance drops from today's roughly 55% to, let's say, 40%. Well, that kind of frees tens of billions of dollars off of the kind of flagship and into altcoins. Although at this point, I'm not convinced, because I do in fact think that actually Bitcoin's just a stock market play and no longer a crypto play. Until we see more altcoin ETFs, I'm not expecting much of this kind of circulating supply to kind of roll around the market. But let's get back to the mainstream perspective here, which is that if you sprinkle some of those billions into XRP plus ETF flows, and suddenly, well, those $10 candles, they don't look so absurd after all. Now, are we guaranteeing things here? Heck no, right? Never confuse a probability with a promise, but probabilities are what traders kind of live on. Okay, so let me kind of slide in a bit of a confession. I used to ignore XRP for years, mostly because my timeline was flooded with loud tribal wars, XRP army versus Bitcoin maxi, right? Popcorn sold separately, of course. But watching it kind of survive SEC lawsuits and still at least trend on kind of Twitter is like kind of seeing your neighbor's 1998 Toyota Corolla still kind of starting every single winter. You got to respect it. Okay, so a quick meta note. If you're new to the channel, yes, we do deeper dives like this all the time inside of our Discord. It's completely free. It's fun. Sometimes someone live streams their kind of session and their screens while rage clicking on TradingView like an esport, right? There is a link down in the description. Bring your jokes. Leave the toxicity, though, at the door. All right, so tension break over. Let's address the elephant then, right? What if the ETFs don't get approved? Well, in that scenario, George kind of sees upside, just, dampened. XRP could still kind of trail broader market moves, maybe hit $5, as a compromise. Now, that's still a 2x from where we are today. That's which kind of outpaces most traditional assets and by a factor of your kind of banker's jaw hitting the floor. But yes, right, without kind of catalysts, kind of prices can, of course, stagnate. Now, the market is, of course, a dog. Catalysts are, well, squeaky toys. And what about regulation? Well, the US election cycle, that we've just seen has changed the SEC leadership, which, swings policy. Now, a friendly regulator and suddenly, Gary Gensler that's no longer with us and his cautionary tales they get archived, right, under historical kind of fiction, if you will. Now, a hostile, time has actually come and gone, and we're actually bringing in and grinding in sideways, regulations that are more positive over in the US, while Asia and Europe, they kind of sprint ahead as well. And that's kind of why positioning and patience really do matter. Now, George kind of wraps up by reminding every viewer that, diversification matters, right? Even if you believe in XRP's kind of moonshot, right, spreading bets, keeps your mental health in check. Right? He suggests a core built around Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and maybe a sprinkle of other kind of late stage blue chips like Solana, Avalanche, Cardano. And then, of course, it's absolutely if you absolutely must, I say, scratch the kind of degen itch, allocate a small slice to meme coins, right? Just be ready to lose it quicker than you can kind of pronounce Floki Flamed Flamingo Inu. So let's go ahead and zoom out and summarize all of this in plain English then, right? A respected analyst with a track record says that XRP doubling, twice by the end of 2025 is the kind of safe scenario. His thesis hangs on ETF approvals, institutional flows, and historical resilience. Bitcoin could set the table by surging past 200K. Ethereum, could serve dessert with a 4x, and altcoin season, might actually supply coffee and mints. Critics, they flip bullish, timing is kind of ripe, but none of this removes the risk. The easy money is gone. The patient money is actually lining up. Decide which side of the fence that you're on before the party even starts. Now, before we wrap up today, here's a tiny reminder. If you're ready to kind of move from spectator to participant, check out Blowfin through the link that's in the description down below. It's got low fees, slick UI, and yes, they actually answer support tickets. So get verified, make your first trade, and you'll wonder why you kind of fiddled around with these exchanges that felt like old fax machines in disguise. And remember, right, trading can be very lonely. Markets are global, but your desk and chair, it isn't. So hop into our Discord, say hi, share a meme, or just lurk for the alpha. There's a link also next to the Blowfin button. So, why don't you go give it a hit and, see what's going on down in the Discord. So, is $10 XRP a pipe dream? Maybe. Maybe not. But if you'd told 2013 me that Bitcoin would brush $70,000 and pierce 100,000 and governments would file ETFs like they're ordering kind of lattes, I'd have laughed, milk foam out of my nose. But reality in crypto has a way of outrunning our imaginations.